So welcome to everybody. Like I said, it's geospatial is everywhere now. What? So some folks are in the morning. Good morning to you, afternoon and evening as well. So we'll get started. I've got a group with me of speakers. I'm the chosen one to do the hosting, but anyone in this group could have done it. Nadine Alamays from OGC, Joe Francisca from Quorum, Ash Richter from InQtel, and myself, Matt Sheehan, via there. I'm going to let each of the speakers introduce themselves as we go through, so I'll not do any particular introductions right now. We have been talking about this webinar for quite some time, us as a group. In fact, it goes back into last year. We're excited to talk to you about, really at a high level, about the geospatial industry and where things are today and where things are going. So this is much more of lots of webinars I've been on historically have been very micro, very focused on data, very focused on solutions and particular products. We're going to take kind of a meso scale view of this stuff. So we're going to really talk about where the industry is and where it's going. And we're living through some very exciting times. So so this should be a good hour. Just to talk through, and many thanks to OGC for hosting this webinar. Just to talk through what this webinar is going to look like. Each of the speakers is going to get 8 minutes, and I've got somewhere here I've got a stopwatch, and I'll be trying to cut them off. So everyone will do their own 8 minutes. We've actually got a couple of questions. We really wanted this to be something that we're all sharing, not just us speaking at you as an audience. We wanted you to participate. So we've got a couple of questions, and we're using a product called Mentimeter, and I'll show it to you when we get to that point. But it allows you actually to input your answers to the questions. So each of the speakers will answer the question, and then we hope we'll get some of your feedback. So we'll be looking at your feedback in comments and in the Mentimeter piece as well. So feel free to jump in and give your thoughts when we get to the questions section. And then we'll finish off the webinar with a short summary from each of the speakers. So that's kind of the running order. We will be recording this, so not only will we put it out, I think in YouTube. We haven't really decided where the video is going to go yet. We'll certainly be linking it in LinkedIn, and we're also going to do a podcast as well. So if you need to drop off, or you've got other colleagues that wanted to couldn't make this, we will be sharing it. So I haven't got my cheat sheet notes in front of me, so I'm going to have to remember what I actually wrote down there. I wanted to very quickly give my actually anything else from the team that I've missed before I jump in.
No, you're good, Matt.
We're good? Okay, then I'll move forward. So my quick 8 minutes, and I'll rush through this. I really wanted just to set the stage for where we got to with this, and hopefully provide a setting for what the others will be speaking about. Again, these are a lot of these are my perspectives, so I'm not going to put words in others' mouths, but I wanted just to set the stage. I've been in the industry for 25 years. I started working in the industry in the 90s. The geospatial industry, and by the way, for those that don't know what the word geospatial means, is it actually means place on Earth. So that's the actual definition of what geospatial is, place on Earth. So geospatial's got a long history. A lot of that's been attached to remote sensing and GIS, so very core areas of the geospatial industry. And we've seen over the last 25 years, we've seen the evolution of the geospatial industry from being very desktop centric. And anyone that's been in the industry for a long while remember MapView and some of those products that were desktop expert tools. We've seen a migration to the web and to mobile as well. So over the years, we've seen this change in access to what is location-based data. So the industry's got a long history. Some have described the industry as a niche in that it's very much centered on those organizations that have actually departments which have experts in them. So that's often the GIS department, the mapping department, a remote sensing department as well. So we've sort of arrived at this place where it's a big industry, but it's centered in certain places. What's been quite notable over the last few years, as with generally the technology world, is we started to collect lots of data, and that's a product of the miniaturization of sensors in many ways. So we now have the ability to put small satellites up into space looking at the Earth, to put sensors into aeroplanes, to put sensors into drones, and terrestrially, we've now got the ability to collect data on a massive scale. That's point data with phones, and we've seen a lot of the COVID work done tracking people using phones. There's LiDAR, which is three-dimensional data. We're now going into buildings and collecting data in buildings. The newest iPhone now has LiDAR built into it. So we now have a tsunami of data. And we've got the ability now, and it's a maturity really of algorithms through artificial intelligent machine learning. We've now got the ability to actually process and analyze that data. So the world is really changing, and a lot of that data that's being collected is fundamentally geospatial. So I've been writing about really these two worlds that we've inhabited. We've got the traditional, very well established, still very important world, which I've been and others been sort of been calling it the Geospatial 1.0, just a definition, right or wrong. And then we've got this emerging world, which is really focused on these new data sets. So you hear a lot about Earth observation, all this new data. There's new companies appearing, lots of startups in the space, artificial intelligence companies. So we've got these emerging two worlds. There's tons and tons of money, or enormous amounts of money, flowing into the new world, actually, into the space and Earth observation world. So we're in the midst of change, and they're exciting changes. We've got some challenges and huge opportunities as we try to explore where we can actually insert geospatial into organizations. And again, the traditional spaces where geospatial has sat have been where there are experts, public sector, very large tier one organizations. But now we've got the opportunity to spread geospatial across across everywhere, so into the mainstream. So that kind of hopefully sets the stage for this conversation. My particular focus at Wire there is how we commercialize geospatial data. So how do we bridge between the different organizations, the public and private, the old and the new? So my focus is really on how we actually share the value of geospatial and have it used everywhere, which is the title of the topic. So let me pass over to Nadine for her 8 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Matt, for setting the scene and for organizing this this session. And thank you to everybody who's joining us. There are more than 85 people on the line taking the time to listen to us, and we want to listen to you too. So please, don't be shy with the questions or observations. Nadine Alamy, OGC CEO, and I often dry run my presentations in front of my two boys, ages 9 and 13, for two reasons. One is if I suck, trust me, they will tell it to my face. And two, they are what we call digital natives. This is a generation that has grown up with iPhones and iPads and Alexas and Siris, self-parking cars. They are video game experts, because I don't want to say addicts. They're video game experts. They get hoverboards, drones as holiday gifts. That's this generation. And now on top of everything, they are being schooled in a total digital virtual environment, right? So when I start to talk, when I start my talks about OGC is a global consortium of geospatial experts working together to make location information findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, power of standards, innovation, and community. By now, my kids would have stopped me. It's like, I don't understand anything that you're saying. But maybe the silver lining of the pandemic, but when they actually come and see what I do every day, right? Then you see that spark. When they see that I work with NASA, with Maxar, on how to organize and share the data from space with all the world. When they see me talking to all these startups, these AI startups, Matt, you mentioned, on how to access and integrate that data for the coolest and the most boring of applications. When they see me talk to city managers about digital twins, right? About how do you connect the traffic cameras and the flooding sensors and so on to create a digital twin. Self-driving cars, drones, to make them aware of where they are and what they could bump into and where they're going. And I also tell them that our work helps, this is how you get the maps to the soldier in a battle, right? To a hiker on a trail, or to a first responder in a disaster. And you definitely get the spark in the eyes when they hear me on the phone with somebody from Epic Games. Those environments, the augmented reality, virtual, I mean, this is where, my kids, Matt, get what geospatial is. And this is when they totally get, without me explaining, that geospatial is everywhere. So that's the easy part almost, right? And I think geospatial is so everywhere that it's also hard to grasp because it's everywhere, because it's every technology, because it's every domain. So how do you articulate a value proposition for something that's at the same time so ubiquitous, but actually the reason why we're here, it's not really fully integrated into where it should be, because we know that it could be so much more. And I think at the end of the day, part of our issue is, does anybody care if it's geospatial or not? Isn't it all information? Isn't it all analytics, right? And is it all just problem solving? And that's why I'm here. I want to hear what Ash, what Joe, what Matt have to say, what everybody on the line have to say, so that we can figure out, I think there's a gap, a bridge that we need to build together, and I want to be part of that. That's my 8 minutes, I think.
You did 3. No, you've got more time if you want to keep going, but that's fine.
My kids would have stopped me. See, I've been trained.
All right, well, why don't we go with Joe next, and Ash after that. So Joe, you're up.
Thanks, Matt. I think actually Nadine gave me a great lead in there. I don't have school-age kids anymore, but I will tell you that one of my kids is an intelligence officer in the Marines, and he came to me once and said, "Dad, do you know anything about this remote sensing stuff?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I have no idea what this is," right? It actually, made my heart warm, the fact that the new generation is taking up this technology and really exploring what the potential is. And I think that's the perspective I want to come from, is all of the new people that are now coming into understanding what the potential of geospatial is or can be, because us, old guys really only have a very limited perspective as what that potential is. So I think companies and organizations are now in the market, who are now in the market, just beginning to understand what that potential is. It's not just my kids, it's everybody who now understands what the potential is. And I do think the pandemic offered a bit of an inflection point where that level of understanding got raised up a little bit. It kind of reminds me of the days that Google Earth came into being. We kind of got what maps can do now, with Johns Hopkins displaying everything on a map. People understood distribution patterns of the disease. That kind of level of understanding is really what we need more of. But there are issues regarding where this future takes us, and Nadine alluded to this a little bit, which is more companies, more organizations are coming to know what the potential is, but they don't know necessarily what can be a possibility. So they have people who are working, and I'm not talking about the people who are in the back rooms and the GIS departments, because organizations getting into this don't have a GIS department. And so what you end up having is they understand the potential of the technology, but they don't have the expertise necessarily to use the technology. So one of the things that we say where I work, I'm the director of geospatial strategy at CREM, is that you can't disassociate expertise from technology. You have to have both, and you have to put the two together. So let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. So I was talking to a company recently who I can't name, but they were users of some level of geospatial technology, but they were running an older version. And the fact is, they didn't know that a newer version existed. They didn't know that the potential to use a better tool yielded millions of dollars of savings. But the fact is, they only knew what they knew. They didn't know unless somebody said, well, you know, there's this new tool out there, or this new version that could really help you get a lot further than what you are currently. And they were leaving money on the table. There was an opportunity cost that was realized, and I think they finally got it after, you know, going through a little bit of an analysis. But let's face it, the technology we have today is amazing, but it's changing so fast that the software is running ahead of the user, right? Likewise, the amount of data and the types of geospatial data, as Matt said, is running ahead of the technology that we have to process it. So let me focus a little bit even deeper. The kind of the technology problem is more or less solved. We're not going to talk about the latest function in GIS software. The functionality is there for many people to use. It's the fact that because you see this explosion, even the vendors are taking a new direction. They're not talking about functionality. They're talking about platform-driven solutions, cloud native, all right? So the delivery platform is different. The information is increasing, the data is increasing, but the delivery is different. And I know, and just as an aside, I know someone in our discussion here today will make the observation that the next 5 million users of geospatial won't know that they're even using geospatial technology. You know, and what a great thing that is, right? What I perceive will happen is that they will find a tool that benefits them, right? So let's forget about the old GIS vendors for a second. If you're a user of Salesforce, or you're a user of Amazon Web Services, or you're a user of Microsoft Azure, every one of those platforms can be enabled geospatially. So I'm going to look and find out what those vendors have to offer me, right? And that's offering a platform to get your job done, right? So you see the difference, you see the different trends taking place in that these mega IT vendors are now creating the platform to get more work done. But I'll go back to what I said earlier. There's still this disassociation of technology and expertise. So there's this knowledge gap among many organizations where they think they know what they can do, but they don't necessarily have the expertise to get it done. And so you have to look elsewhere to get that kind of that knowledge gap. So, you know, I do see this collision of platform. I think Matt alluded to the fact that there's, you know, obviously small sensors, whether it's remote sensors or ground sensors. There's obviously 5G that's coming, and that's causing a great deal of maybe opportunity out there. Before I end, I want to take a little bit of a look backward, because it relates to some of the things that we have to talk about looking forward. In 1993, there was a book written by my friend and mentor, a guy by the name of Gil Castle. Now, the book was entitled Profiting from a GIS, and it profoundly, you know, changed a little bit of the way I think of it, because I look at things from a business perspective and I look for business applications. The book was a compendium of authors. And in Gil's chapter on real estate, he made the observation that geospatial technology must be a fundamental embedded piece of technology into enterprise solutions. Now, maybe some of you had heard that before, but I believe Gil was one of the first people to actually make that observation. I wrote the chapter on insurance, and I was reporting on something called the geographic underwriting system. It was a system built for underwriters and insurance. Way back then, even in major insurance companies were looking at embedding geospatial technology into an enterprise system. That was true then, it's even truer today. And many companies are trying to operationalize what they know about geospatial technology. They are embedding it as a common fundamental IT solution into mainstream business applications. That's where geospatial is going. That's what will continue to happen in the technology. And I think you're going to just see more of that. And so it will be hidden. but it's going to be a fundamental piece into everything that we expect and understand. Companies like Uber and Lyft and others don't exist without geospatial. They just simply aren't there. So when you see that kind of embedding of IT's functionality into companies, you have to look as those as models and as a paradigm as to what's to come. So guys, thanks for giving me the opportunity, and I guess Ash is up next.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I'm going to ask a question of you all after. I know we've got questions to the audience, but I have a question. But Ash, you go, and then I'll ask a question to the three of you because something's straight in my mind. Go for it, Ash.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's so exciting to kind of formalize the bits of chat that we've been having during the planning, and been stopping ourselves during the planning sessions from full geek out on a lot of these things, because we wanted to essentially have that larger geek out in front of a wider audience. And in addition to agreeing with everything that has been said before, because it's just that everything keeps queuing up on top of everything, I kind of wanted to really dig into some of those pieces there that came up, though, with ubiquitous technology and this rollout that we're seeing, and where we're seeing it stop and start today. Because I'm coming at this from a really weird place. I didn't start out as a geospatial professional. I started out as an archaeologist. My first couple of degrees were straight up archaeology, ancient history. But it became this concept of the fieldwork components that crossed over into GIS, and then a super focus on terrestrial laser scanning, because I was really, really frustrated by how we were visualizing the data we were collecting, how we were mapping that, how are we looking at the maps over time, how do we digitize time and space, how do we visualize time and space. And that's pretty much been at the heart of the geospatial challenge for the last several millennia. How do we take what we're seeing around us, whether it's our eyes or these days all of the different sensors we've created and expanded upon, to become different different types of eyes, essentially across the electromagnetic spectrum and across the scale from microscopic to macroscopic geospatial imaging. How are we going to bring all of these things together? Is kind of the sorry. I also have this giant bee that has wandered in from outside, and so I hope you guys aren't hearing this like extreme buzzing attack as he's like beating on the window to get out. We finally had good weather. I opened the door. It was an error. All of this data is being collected, and it's coming from all of these different verticals for all of these different niche areas. But it's not necessarily coming together as quickly as it could. It's becoming ubiquitous, and it is there at the base of everything, even if we don't recognize it in geospatial. And I think this is something that I'm hoping we're going to talk about today. How do we actually let everybody know that it's geospatial, that this mapping piece is the core, whether it's mixed reality or whether it's smart cities? At the heart of it, that sort of glue that will hold all of these different data sets together are those time-space variables that mapping represents, that geospatial technologies represent. Because I do see a huge disconnect, especially with many of the verticals that we're running into in the startup community, because that's what I do now. I lead the geospatial and spatial computing investment strategies for InQtel, which supports the U.S. and partner intelligence communities and defense groups with respect to investing in those startups and these emerging technology spaces, and working towards not just technologies that are going to support them in their current missions, but become ubiquitous down the line. Because I think that that's something that we don't often look as much as we should as in society. Somewhere in amongst the various engineering archaeology degrees, there was an anthropology degree, and this concept of ubiquitous technology through time and space, we have a really bad habit of getting to the point where we forget that something is technology. Like, I often like to just point at really simple things like pens or purses are like these things that at once upon a time had these huge existential significance and pieces in our lives. Pens were sacred things. Being able to write the thing in your head and put it out on paper was insane once upon a time. It was hard to grasp. It had mythological significance, religious significance. We don't necessarily do that with technology anymore. We move straight to the secular. We understand that it's science, that technology just moves along those lines, but it means we actually absorb it that much faster and then forget it's there. And with this bit of technology, this arena of technology that basically bleeds into everything else, we can't afford to do that. It's too important, and it's going to hit us really, really hard, really, really fast. And we need to be ready for what that's going to mean and how it's going to change society. because that is what we've seen over time. Expanding the maps of the world expanded civilization, literally, as explorers went out and brought back this data, and we're like, oh, there's a whole other continent over there. Like, these are things that change things down the line for our species, and our species is definitely in a lot of danger. We have so many different extinction stories at our fingertips right now, whether it's climate change or the ongoing nuclear issues. Like, we can't afford to let this technology roll out into ubiquitous everything, into the ubiquitous surveillance paradigm that it could easily shift into, because mapping is tracking. If we're getting to the point that the mapping systems that we are using every day are not just in our phones, but aspects of our house are mapped and smart enough to be tracking every action that we do, the smart cities as surveillance states, like all of these things, we're there to a certain extent already, but it's almost like we're on a log ride, which hopefully everybody in the audience has experienced one of these before COVID times things, but even then it was a bit retro. These log rides where you're sort of riding an amusement park ride, like through a sort of calm, lovely little pool, and then it goes up. And you're going up and up and above everyone. And that's what the last couple of decades have been for geospatial technologies. We've been going up steadily and solidly. People have been getting used to it. They've been starting to pull these things in, starting to recognize that they need to build these components into their enterprise platforms per Joe's thing. But now we're at the point where we're up above everything. And we're riding along and we're like, oh, see, look, it's here. It's everywhere. It's here. But the bit of the log ride that everybody gets on the log ride for is that massive rush as we swoosh into the sort of next arena. And I think what we need to be conscious of as we go out there, we need to be bracing ourselves. We need to be preparing for ethical, democratic ideals to be built into this confluence of data that all of these things represent, because I think otherwise we are going to be headed to some very, very scary places. And I will leave it on that total downer of a note, and we'll move on to the group chat.
Any comments from Nadine and Joe on what Ash said, or anything else? I have a question, so yes, Nadine.
I can comment pretty quickly because I see the questions also on the chat. Something I keep realizing, I don't know why, so I'm a techie person. So Ash, I'm the total opposite. I'm like your MIT geek. It's all technology. I love it. And, you know, these conversations help me ground myself, right? So what I realized from my OGC experience is actually we take a lot of things for granted. So I think that's your point, Ash, but also we assume that things are done, but they're not done. Like I was participating last week in a GeoAI, right, summit, and you would think by everybody talking about GeoAI and all these startups that it's actually something real, but it's actually, we haven't figured out 90% of it. There are standards that need to be developed to actually support this. There are platforms that need to be developed to get the full potential. And I hear the same thing with Internet of Things. Like you would think Internet of Things, it's everywhere. But actually, I know we talk about it as if it is, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think I agree with you, Ash, that we get caught into always the next best thing versus capitalizing on what we can do to its full extent for the good of society. Like you mentioned, climate change, another topic for conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Nadine. And I'm looking at the questions as well. I'll try and cover a couple of things here. And I'm about to ask a question very quickly. So I think that the one thing I mentioned here is there's a definite, it's a loose definition of the 1.0 world. That's the established world. That is, I suppose the definition there would be, we've been centered around the map generation pattern within GIS remote sensing. You know, an expert is given a problem, looks for data, uses an expert desktop tool to provide what is an output, which is a map. So we've lived in that pattern, which is changing. I don't think any of these worlds are relevant, are less relevant than the other. 1.0, 2.0, all the emerging things that are happening. So there was just a question about the difference 1.0 and 2.0. But I think that what I was going to ask everyone was very quickly was, it feels like we've got disconnected pieces, and something in our prior conversation, Nadine, you mentioned the word bridge. or bridges, building bridges between the established world, the new world, the OGC, which is a standards organization, super important to everybody. The venture capital community that's pouring money into Earth observation and space stuff. They're pouring money in. It feels as though we've got a disconnected world at the minute that we need to connect to help move geospatial forward. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm happy to comment very quickly because I commented earlier, but so if it makes anybody feel better, this is not only our problem, right? It's a problem because of the innovation and this rush, this excitement about, you know, the pace of the world. I just came prior to joining OGC from the aviation world, and we experienced the same thing. We were working with commercial airlines, a very conservative industry, and then drones and, you know, air mobility, urban air mobility popped up, and guess what? Totally disconnected communities, even though they're all flying things, right? And you would think you you essentially go from one to the next, but it's actually not. Or you would think they would be talking to each other, but they're not. So what they develop, again, from an OGC perspective, this new community that was, you know, Silicon Valley heavy, young, you know, guys and girls working. It's like data models. So they start developing their own data models and their own APIs and their own best practices, not thinking that eventually this is actually part of the bigger picture, especially when we start, you know, solving bigger problems. Again, smart cities could be one because it's like more than just your thing and your application. Climate change is the other way. And that's when I talk about the bridge. They need us. If you call us old people, okay, I'll accept it. But they need us because we've got the expertise, right? It's the same expertise that needs to evolve to help them. But also we need them because they have the problems and the new technologies and just a different way at connecting things. And that's the bridge there.
Yeah.
I think I agree. I think there's some interesting disconnects as different groups realize they need the mapping component and they don't necessarily have those skills. I definitely see a lot of startups that they're essentially recreating wheels. Just like Nadine said, who are like, oh, we want to build this amazing metaverse piece of something, and they're trying to recreate GIS from the ground up, and it's like, let's not do that. Let's pull folks into these communities. And so I think there's a lot we can do in terms of science communication, in terms of the geospatial community reaching out to these other entities, like OGC is a champion at. Like I'm so excited to see this trajectory that OGC is on, doing exactly that, because they don't necessarily know. And I think everybody, even when they're evaluating what product they're going to build, they get stuck in their sort of niche community that they're building in, or their tech community, and often don't even look at the other verticals who might be touching on the same thing. And one of the groups that I've seen this happen to, or rather there's sort of an interesting pattern that emerged, was about 5 or 6 years ago. There was a sort of terrestrial LiDAR explosion. Like everyone was like, oh my gosh, look, LiDAR for autonomous vehicles. And it was social media extravaganza. And heretofore, working as a LiDAR field surveyor, like once upon a time, people were like, I don't know what that is. Like LiDAR, what is this word that you're saying? Like lasers? Like what is this? What does it do again? Like it was this mystery word. And then all of a sudden people knew what it was because it was associated with autonomous vehicles. It was Elon Musk hated LiDAR. Like there was this weird buzz about it. And it had a really interesting effect where all the different verticals, all the different industries that touched on LiDAR, whether it was my own like digital heritage stuff, the mining industry, the autonomous vehicle industry, all of these groups, government, education, special effects in Hollywood, everyone started talking and being like, oh, are you doing LiDAR? I'm doing LiDAR too. And it turned into these amazing conversations that started happening that I very much attribute with some of the big kickoff to getting us to the sort of spatial computing trajectory that we're on, where all of these things are suddenly increasingly possible, where there's money being put into developing mixed reality systems to map interior spaces and to actually start using and building on that as a digital scaffold for everything, because it was something that broke traditional boundaries by using new media to start debating it. And in debating it, everybody realized they were talking about the same thing. That said, what I've since realized is happening horribly is everybody going back into their silos a bit. I'm not seeing as much general chatter as I used to about like, well, what's the future of this? How could we be expanding this further? Everyone's like, well, here's now what I'm building for my niche industry. And so where we were starting to go like broad, it's sort of almost this like narrow to broad to narrow again. And I would love to see what we could do to open up that conversation across whether it's different industry verticals who are focusing on the same technology, or even pulling apart industry to government or industry to government academia. You have this insane kind of loggerheads that happens, this jam that happens as everybody's working at different paces on different pieces of it and not necessarily connecting the dots all together, going over and crossing these bridges and making friends on the other side.
Yeah, I want to make a quick comment on what you said, Ash, and maybe pull on the thread a little bit, is that I do see that push and pull and people going back into their silos, but I also see a different tact going on, which is that sometimes the people who are now coming into the space, who are not necessarily the geo geeks like we are, have just as relevant and a different perspective as those of us who are here, right? And the more interesting thing is, I know an individual who is well, let's put it this way. He was the GIS director for the city of San Mateo, California. He's no longer the director of GIS. He's the director of IT. And he's looking to hire people as data scientists, not as geogeeks. He's not hiring people who have degrees in GIS. He's hiring data scientists who can come in, look at a situation maybe more objectively and say, I'm going to pull this technology or that API or that platform and put together something that fits for me. So yes, there are people who are sort of recreating some of the wheel, but they also have a very different perspective on what the tools are and what they can use to craft a solution.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Now I've just put the first Mentimeter question up. Can we see that? I want to make sure I've got multiple screens, so as long as you can see that. I will just add, great. I will just add that there are some questions here which we can maybe take offline, but around about the conversation, which was actually in the GeoIgnite conference in Canada that's ongoing. It came up a number of times. Commercialization of geospatial. How do we commercialize it? Why have we been 25 years and we've still got these big areas which haven't yet touched on? And we're kind of touching that in this conversation, but in the chat here, we've got some people asking that question. So maybe we can cover that in our answers to these questions. So why don't we start with this first question? And we've already got people jumping in. So Nadine, do you want to jump in and answer that question? And feel free to look at some of the questions being asked here, or in the webinar chat.
Yeah, I'm just mesmerized by the questions that are coming in. So maybe we can do 2 in 1 here.
Right, go for it.
I think I love this question about if it's been happening for 25 years and we're still only at the tip of the iceberg, I think, or the log. Why is it so slow? And I think that's what we've been talking about for the last probably, 15 minutes. And I think that's where we can't wrap our heads around it to actually have what we call like an action plan. This is what we need to do. And I think we are fragmenting ourselves, right, by all doing it, everywhere, ending up, I like what Ashley said, ending up often in silos again. But then you get something like the digital twins, where actually your hydrology model silo and the transportation model silo and the sociology model silo, guess what? They're going to have to work together if we're going to do this digital twin that, again, everybody's talking about as it's a solved problem. And I think it goes back to, it's like, yeah, we've been doing the basics for 25 years. I think to me, that's why OGC is buzzing these days, because we're beyond the basics and now we need to connect and we need to integrate and we need to actually analyze. But we're having difficulty doing that in all sorts of places. It's not an answer, but it's just, Matt put me on the spot. That's the best I can do, Matt.
That was good. That's good. I'm looking at the input that people have got here. So what is geospatial to you? Location information, everything related to space and Earth, geo. It's about places and the relationships between places. Spot on. It's just geography and location data, tools and services available to us digitally. You know, and I was just going to say, we seem to be. I've been a geographer my whole life, and I came to America and became a map maker, which I thought, why am I making maps? And I'm generalizing here when I think geospatially. And geospatially is, I mean, I used to study physical geography, so why is there a U-shaped valley just up the road from here in Salt Lake City? And I look down on it on the big scale and go, well, it's different to a V-shaped valley. Why is that? And you really narrow it down to the factors which create it, and it's the, you know, it's action that creates that. That's really the data. So study of geography is really the study of place, and human geography, physical geography, study of place. I think that's what we're getting back to. Actually, we're not so much map makers, and I'm generalizing about the map making thing. I know lots of people do analysis, but I think, and somebody asked about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, I think, is going to help us sift through all this data, not have to do the manual work anymore, simplify our role, but really use our brains to understand the answer to a geographic question. I think that's the key to it. So those are my thoughts. Any other comments from you guys on that, or anything that's coming in on what is geospatial to you, or what is geospatial to you? I mean,
well, I guess I'll chime in. So, you know, it's hard for me to answer something like that because I've been in the business for 40 odd years. But you know, we're lucky enough to have, I think, latched onto a profession that we very much love and you know, really adopt more personally, right? I think that we've stayed in this profession because we see the potential. It's so interesting to us, and it's interesting what other people have done with the technology that I think really makes it fascinating, because even though I've been in the business for a long time, I'm continually amazed at the new applications that people find for using this. And so I'll give you an example. There was somebody was using one of the APIs for a company I used to work with, and it was an API that was related to E911, and they embedded the API into a defibrillating machine on a wall. You know, you walk around an airport and there's a defibrillating machine. Well, what happened is that if somebody detached that defibrillator from the wall, it automatically dialed 911 and dispatched an emergency vehicle to the location. Now, how cool an application is that, right? So it just took a simple API, dial the 911 number, locate where you are, send a vehicle. I mean, that is really a great example of what the potential of the technology has. And I'll just react to one of the questions that somebody asked about, well, if this has been happening for 25 years, why are we still at the tip? I got news for you. We've been doing this for 50, 60 years. And the problem is that we are finding these new applications. And isn't it great? Because new people are coming into our technology and finding what's so very exciting and very new.
Can I? Ash, go ahead.
Are you sure? I'm probably going to go somewhere super controversial. You might want to not.
So then I'll say it. Can you scroll up just a little bit, Matt? I just want to thank whoever put in the this answer, the environmental impacts, the geoethics. I think because this is also part of our problem. If you look at the other answers, we're defining geospatial as places and times and technologies, and and actually let's start talking about it, in terms of impacts, especially those in your face impacts. So environmental is actually a great example, and the ethics, going back to the surveillance, surveillance, what was it, cities, I think, Ash, that you mentioned. Some people say smart cities, SS is actually surveillance cities, so we have to be careful. But that's why geoethics is now also bubbling up, because we're sitting on some, tricky, right? It's tricky times, because at Parsons says it best, we have unleash the genie out of the bottle with respect to, you can track location and you can connect all these dots. So we have to also think about it. So I just want to thank whoever put that impact part as part of geospatial.
I really like that one too, because for me, geospatial is definitely an emphasis on this notion of time. It's not just place; it's place over time. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is increasingly possible is both being able to move through space faster via spatial awareness. We have all the delivery apps that we just use on a regular basis now. We don't really even think about like, oh, look how lovely this is. Like everybody just used mapping today to get dinner. Like it's a thing. You order something from Amazon, mapping. But I think one of the things that we're going to find more and more roll out to over the next couple of years is interactive time spaces and this notion of past being part of our present and how we're going to deal with having that kind of information in our face all the time. Hopefully we'll be able to cultivate it into something that helps us make better decisions. But I think one of the things that we tend to do, especially this century, is ignore our longer term history on things. And this is actually, I wanted to address the question also in the chat of the Esri piece that's over there of, well, how can we avoid the commercialization with these megacores and things like that? Why haven't they taken this on? How is this all going to work together? And I think the thing somehow all rolled together for me is that one of the things that's slowing this down, this extreme trajectory we could be on, is the same thing that's slowing every aspect of digital transformation, of every form of commercialization down, is that we're not necessarily culturally ready for it. We're going to push back. We're pushing back in AI via whether it's data silos between different departments in a company or personal egos. Like there's a lot of very on the ground factors that often stop base level implementation of extreme data systems or even basic data systems, to be perfectly honest. And solving those, getting to that, which is literally getting to that enterprise grade level of rollout for even traditional what we think of as geospatial today. If we were to stop innovating entirely, just geospatial as it is right now, even getting to that point for most companies is going to be a couple of years of legwork and a lot of untangling really personal dynamics, whether it's file flow through the company or permissions things. It's often very tiny, very seemingly mundane things that are stopping groups from syncing their data together, let alone remapping it into larger conflations of data. And I think it's that same thing on a macro scale that's kind of stopping a lot of mass scale commercialization or realization by the larger companies that they really need to overhaul their systems. We get stuck in this concept of, well, this is the way it is. So this next generation of mapping, it's just going to be, we're going to be able to tag it on to what we already have. We're going to be able to slowly build up from it, or we're going to be able to pull it in and we're going to keep our 9-to-5 jobs. Everything's going to be as it is because as it is great. But here's the thing, like a lot of these assumptions we make about what life looks like, we're challenging them often these days. Especially, I mean, COVID challenged it hard. Look at the format for this presentation. We can be remote. We do not have to all be clustered in an office. Offices themselves, like what, 140-ish years old as a mainstream concept, courtesy, thank you, of UK banking. Like these are things that are going to change as more and more levels of mapping and really personal levels of mapping really start interplaying in everything. And I think these, I'm not sure what to call them, these workflow challenges that we're seeing micro to macro, whether it's literally like these practical things through to these larger existential crises of what is society, that are stopping us doing it. I know that sounds kind of like super massive and hippy dippy in a certain sense, but it does. I've seen this played out both in industry and especially in government. Like these are the things that stop innovation in its tracks in a certain place, and then it becomes innovation theater because everybody is like, well, we're going to implement this and we're going to implement this, and everybody pilots. Pilots aren't good enough. It needs to actually be embedded to the point that it's the back. You don't even realize it's happening anymore. It's the back conflation of everything talking together and everything going from there. But most groups are struggling to even get to that point for a variety of these reasons, because it does mean a bit of an overhaul to everything from how we work together in our office pods, I suppose, for lack of a better phrase, through to how we work together on ever increasing larger scales. Neighborhoods, cities, nations, planet.
Yeah, thanks, Ash. Yeah, it's fascinating. I've just put the second question up. What excites you about the future of geospatial? We've got a couple of answers. Ubiquity, positive social impact of innovative problem solving. That's a good one. We only have a few minutes left. So, and it's as we suspected, when we were talking together prior to this webinar and multiple times, we spoke for a long, long time about all of these different topics. So there's lots to cover. Let's just flash through you guys. I mean, feel free to talk about what people are writing here. What are your guys' thoughts on what excites you about the future of geospatial? Again, we've got 8 minutes. So if you could go quickly. Nadine, you go. Oh, no, Ash, you go. Go for it.
I'm after holodecks. Like that's where we can get, if we're mapping people's physical forms, we're mapping activities, we're mapping everything at scale, we have the training data to actually expand out. And I think we're seeing between virtual influencers and digital beings on one end of the not necessarily traditional geospatial mapping scale, but it is a form of mapping. It's people's physical forms being remapped into physical digital landscapes and interacting with everything from the furniture to city streets. I think we are going to get there sooner than we expect. Whether or not it will look like Star Trek will be another thing, but I think it's also going to be a very terrifying and interesting misinformation mechanism to show you what happened, for instance, like a presidential inauguration, or if we like have future controversial events, to be able to replay those on the city streets and follow individual actors, because we have that level of sensing and surveillance that allows those activities to be remapped into what's happening and then cross-referenced across time. It's going to be interesting, it's going to be dangerous, and I think it's going to be useful at the same time. So where it'll all end up, I'm not sure. I also would like to put in a shout out vote for, can we space colonize faster? Let's somehow push on. But yeah.
All right, Nadine, you have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. All right. What excites me most about the future of geospatial? I want to say climate change. Mostly because I think we have the power and the know-how here with the the 100 so on the line, right, to actually take this concept of digital twin that we're all talking about, and essentially we can start simulating, gamifying climate change, whereas we can start to track decisions that are made at the local level and their global impact, and vice versa. So I just answered the questions, like imagine if the urban planners can actually start to, in a game-like environment, that's digital twins, to make the changes, and out you can see that the health of the community improved, that the carbon emission was reduced. That's whole trace. And similarly for climate change, that if you close some factories or you have more renewable energy or whatever it is, and you start to trickle it down all the way, that actually impacts the prices of things that the consumer is buying in the market, or again the health. I think that's what excites me about the future. We have the ability to connect all these things to actually make very quick impact. That's very exciting.
Yeah.
That's also now.
Yeah. Thank you, Nadine. Joe?
Yeah, so the title of this webinar was Geospatial Everywhere, What's Next? And I think what's next is the investment of the venture capital community. And of course, Ash is involved in that directly. I did even a brief survey a couple of months ago about how much money was flowing into some of the startups. I counted northwards of $2 billion just in the last 5 years. I'm sure it's probably more than that. And the fact is that all of this new money is coming in, and somebody's going to succeed, right? Not everyone will. But I think the new players, the new money, and the new startups are going to be one way that is exciting. The other thing is that we're even seeing it this year in some of the consolidation of geospatial technology. You see what happened with my former company, Pitney Bowes, precisely being funded by VCs and equity partners. You see small geospatial companies being bought and consolidated. You see a kind of a consolidation into certain sectors, real estate. So I think what you're going to find is that there will be more new players, and many more people will start to embed the technology, and I think you'll see more solutions out there. So, and one other point about consolidation, you saw Salesforce get into the business, both with the acquisition of Map Anywhere, that's now called Salesforce Maps. You saw them buy Tableau, which actually has geospatial, functionality. So again, big IT players coming in and big money from the VC community.
Yeah. Thanks, Joey. Thanks to everybody. We could have gone on for another hour, I'm sure, but we're out of time. So I just wanted to round things up. Thanks so much for the Mentimeter input. What I'll try to do is to actually gather that input and share that with everybody, because there was some great input there. The questions as well. We'll follow up on the questions that have come up, and there's been a bunch of them as well. So we touched on some of them. Thanks for those. We'll follow up with you. This is going to be posted, like I said, on LinkedIn, and we'll put it on YouTube. We'll put it as a podcast as well. So we'll share this. Let's continue the conversation. I think one of the things that we're most interested in is, as an audience, we've wondered about taking this further. I mean, we had a really big look at the whole world of geospatialists and covered a lot of ground. We've wondered about continuing the conversation, where we should take that to. Feel free to give us input if this was useful to you. If there are areas that we maybe could cover in other webinars moving forward, just let us know. So I think that what I would say to close on my side would be, let's keep the conversation going. Any other thoughts from the panel?
Thanks for all your questions. Great questions.
Thanks for all your questions, and just a plea for everybody to get out there on their science communication bandwagon, because the more everybody is aware of how all of these mapping things fit together, what even the different components of mapping are, I think the better these future systems will be planned and roll out.
I think, thank you for being part of the community and for your interest in this webinar.
Great. Good way to finish. We're on top of the hour, so thanks everyone for attending. Thanks to the panel, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks to you all.